We are joined by Kevin McCole, the Chief Operating Officer of UK-India Business Council. Previously, before joining UK-India Business Council in 2008, McCole has serious experience in India. He's worked for 3 years in the Kolkata High Commission, where you brokered a lot of deals for the UK and furthered the trade between both the countries. Now, when we talk about what the trade ties look like between India and the UK, it's a fairly balanced relationship. UK is in fact the 4th largest investor into India, and so is India. India is the 4th largest investor for the UK as well. And as I understand, that place was in fact 3rd before it got replaced by France, I think a year ago. So what do you think led to that drop in India's investments into UK?
Ridhima, thank you. You've excellently highlighted, as I was going to try and do myself, the strength of the UK bilateral trade and investment relationship. For many years, the 12 years I've been working in the UK-India relationship, India's always been there in the top 5 or so of the investors in the UK. And as you rightly say, it's slipped to place in the most recent statistics. But that actually doesn't reflect a reduction in Indian investment into the UK. It reflects other countries investing more in the UK. And it's interesting that a major EU country, France, invested more and leapt over India this year. And what's also worth sort of bearing in mind in that relationship is the number of jobs Indian companies create in the UK. 110,000 people are employed in the UK by Indian companies, which is phenomenal and really underpins a strong bilateral relationship.
As I understand, there was also a joint economic trade committee which UK-IBC was very much a part of. So what were some of the key outcomes that came out of that particular committee?
This was 2 weeks ago in London. Commerce Minister Suresh Prabhu visited London for 2-3 days. Joint Economic and Trade Committee is an annual bilateral meeting between the Indian Commerce Minister and the UK's Secretary of State for International Trade. And this was the first time Minister Prabhu had met Secretary of State Fox. And something that really struck me, this is the 12th JETCO meeting and the 12th that I've been involved in. And one of the most striking aspects was the great atmospherics that were there. Particularly striking given it was the first time the ministers had even met, but there seemed a real commonality of purpose between the two of them. Dr. Fox was very keen that as the EU and the UK go in different directions, that India is going to be one of the UK's top markets and top partnerships for trade and investment. And this Joint Economic and Trade Committee, over the last 12 months, has started to look at some of those areas. Not talking about a free trade agreement, the UK is not in a position to do that just yet, but look at some of the barriers in both directions that's stopping Indian trade to the UK, British trade to India. And there's a real positive roadmap was identified and announced by the ministers last week. There were 2 working groups took place, one on smart cities and infrastructure, and one on advanced manufacturing and technological collaboration. 2 areas where the UK and India have got huge synergies and lots to offer each other. But the ministers also identified 3 core sectors where there's mutual interest in removing non-tariff barriers. And those are in the food and drink sector, pharmaceutical, healthcare, life sciences, and also in the IT and IT-enabled services. So there's going to be working groups set up where both governments negotiate, but bringing in inputs from businesses on both sides to identify what those barriers are and to try and come to arrangements whereby the ease of trade and investment between the 2 countries can be improved through this negotiated dialogue. So this is the first time the JETCO has had such an impetus. And when you build that substance into the atmospherics, then I think we've got a real solid foundation for the UK and India to move forward with.
So January 11 is when the meeting JETCO got over, and it's very strategic because it's in April that Prime Minister Narendra Modi would be visiting London, if I'm not wrong. So since you have already outlined the sectors that UK would be able to help India with, or vice versa, are there any projects, government projects that you have also outlined through JETCO that you could probably suggest to the Prime Minister, or you have keen interest in working with India on?
I think the UK-India relationship is so big and broad and deep, it's difficult to narrow down into one or two things. But you rightly identify that January through to April is going to be critical. It's a unique opportunity for the UK-India trade and investment relationship. As I said, Mr. Prabhu was in London this month. Here in Mumbai on the 5th of February, there's something called Createch, which has been run by the British High Commission here, bringing the best of creative industries and the best of technology from the UK and India together. And we really think that is a tremendous area where there's fantastic synergies. And then we move on, also in April, Finance Minister JAITLEY is due to be in London for the annual bilateral with our Finance Minister. That's the Economic and Financial Dialogue. And then 1 week later, Mr. Modi will be in London. So there's these very high profile activities taking place which offer a great opportunity. Now, as I touched on a moment ago, I think what can really take to the next level the UK-India relationship is a proposition the UK has around capital and technology. You know, the City of London is the world's financial capital, and there's a lot of investment that can come from the city into India, and already does. For example, of all the masala bonds that have been issued since 2014, 80% of them have come from London. That's $4 billion have come from London in just a few years, and most of that investment has gone into infrastructure or green energy. So there's real positives there that London can be a source of capital, but also that source of technology. And there's some work the UKIBC is doing looking at digital disruption and in Industry 4.0. So this brings in Make in India, it brings in Digital India, but it also brings in Skill India and Educating India. So I think the UK and Indian companies have got great technologies, great collaborations, and also I think UK universities in terms of that skilling for science and engineering can really bring a lot of really positive things together. So we think that's one area where there is tremendous scope, and we hope that can stimulate a 21st century science and technology driven relationship between Britain and India. And we already see it happening. I think it was towards the end of last year, Rolls-Royce, one of Britain's biggest defence and aerospace companies, one of the world's biggest defence and aerospace companies, signed an agreement with TCS on digital manufacturing. And you already see the best of Make in India and the best of Digital India coming together. And that merger is a really exciting and powerful place.
You also talked about some of the trade barriers that you feel need to be eased. If you had to list out some of the trade barriers that the Modi government could do away with, what could those trade barriers really be in terms of making the business easier in India?
What are those main barriers? Top three, sort of legal and regulatory delays and frustrations. Over the 3 years, that has got better, according to our survey. Second area is corruption, and that's got much better. So the first survey in 2015, 52% of businesses said corruption was one of the main barriers to doing business in India. This year, that number's down to 36%. So that's a fantastic shift there. And the third aspect is the tax complications. Now, there's a range of different issues in there, from retrospective taxation. Although it only affects a small number of businesses, they're very high profile issues, and they still create a degree of caution about India as major companies are looking to invest in India. This is still hanging there, that the statute book still has this provision to retrospectively tax businesses. So a clear signal that Mr. JAITLEY could give in his budget next week could be to amend that legislation. So that would be a key ask from UK businesses. The other barriers around taxation, around GST. Now, there's a widespread belief that GST had to be introduced. Indeed, in our surveys over the years, the number one reform requested by British business was the introduction of GST. So people are happy that that's there, but they want the government to continue what it's doing in learning as GST rolls out and how to simplify it. Now, before GST, it's a small example for the UKIBC, we used to issue 2 filings a year. When GST was introduced, that rose to 111 filings we had to do. Now, modifications have been made since July, which reduces that, but it's still, these are some of the unintended consequences of rolling this out. So the British businesses are very keen that the government continues to learn as it implements and to simplify GST as it rolls out, because we do believe it can be a real game changer for the Indian economy and the simplification of the ease of doing business.
Obviously. So that's a clear set of demands, and I hope a lot of them do get met in the budget. Going forward, so considering that the April meeting would happen and there would be some agreements and MOUs that would be signed, from its 4th place as the largest investor, 4th largest investor into India, where does UK see itself going in the near future? Would it like to become the 3rd or the 2nd? And if yes, how would that really work out?
Okay. What says the UK is already, since 2000, the number one investor in the G20 in India. Mauritius and Singapore, if you look at the general stats, are above the UK. But if you disaggregate the investments that come from those two jurisdictions and take it back to source, then the UK is the number one investor in India. I think since 2000, there's been about $24 billion worth of investment. And that doesn't take into account the foreign institutional investment that takes place, the private equity and venture capital investment that goes in directly. So, or there's Masala bonds and other investments that come through the City of London. So the totality of the UK economic engagement with India is much stronger than number 4 in that list would actually say. But there is potential for much more. And there are a number of areas, if I could just mention 3 as briefly as I can. One is in the defence sector. FDI in defence has been relaxed since 2014, which UK defence companies are very pleased with. But there's an issue around the offset rules, the offset requirements for making defence manufacturing here in India. And with some sensible tweaking of those offset requirements, UK businesses would be prepared to invest much more in making here in India. The second area is around FDI restrictions in 3 areas I can touch on. One is insurance sector. The cap is 49% at the moment. If that was raised, it would bring in more investment from the UK, building on what Standard Life have already done, what Aviva have already done, what Bupa have already done, what Prudential have already done. But bringing in more capital, that will increase insurance penetration across India, which provides valuable service to the people of India, but also brings more capital into the economy, which can then be invested in long-term projects, including Indian infrastructure development. So there's win-win-wins in raising that cap. Another area where there's a ban on foreign practice, or 2 areas. One is in lawyers and one is in architects. So as India's got its urban development smart city agenda, there's lots of British architecture firms who are really keen to come to India to invest, to bring their technology, to train young Indians to become global architects. But they're limited from doing that because there's a ban on architects practicing here. And that's one of the issues that we're going to be taking forward in the Joint Economic and Trade Committee as we move forward. So there, I think 2 areas, so FDI caps, defence offsets are areas where I think ease those areas and more British investments will come and keep the UK as the number one investor in India.